In my presentation this morning, I will talk to you about access to archive databases at the Danish National Archives and a project that we've had about implementing a new access system based on the open source tool database preservation toolkit. First, just a few words about data science at the Danish National Archives, because we're quite a new department within the Danish National Archives. We have various tasks centered around how new technology can help us get new value from our archives, whether they are born digital archives or digitized documents of all our paper records. So we have about 25 people on staff, and we're responsible for the business side of the development and maintenance of systems that give access to our archive-born digital data. But we also have some groups of data scientists that work with the creation of new data sets based on paper records. We use transcribers, we use all sorts of other tools that our data scientists have in our toolbox. And we also work with the development of methods to link historical personal data and to create a historical person register. I'm not going to say anything about the two latter dots, but just to give you an idea of what the department is like. The department is half funded by external resources, so I have 12 people on like ordinary pay, and the rest is paid for by external funding. So that's always an exciting situation for the management. Now, today we're going to talk about making born digital records accessible, and more specifically in the form of archived information packages. We've seen this picture already once today. I'm not going to go into details with the OAIS model, but it's just to be sure that you are familiar with it, and also because I will reference to the information package concept in my presentation. So we have what is submitted to the archive by the records creator is a submission information package. It's then, after quality assurance, stored as an archive information package. And then finally, since we are an archive and we want not just to receive and preserve information, but we also want to make it accessible, we hand it out in the form of a dissemination information package to the consumer or to the user, and that's where we come in. The archiving of databases is certainly not something new for the Danish National Archives. We got our first regulations for the submission of what we then called EDP records to the National Archives. I use the word we in a broad sense, even though I'm old. I was not on staff in 1975. But it's a 50-year anniversary for the first regulations about how to submit data to the archives. One of the main pillars in the strategy for digital preservation at the DNA has always been system-independent archiving of relational databases. And even if the IT system where data is created was a records management system, we always have a relational databases with information about the document and files, and then the documents in a separate structure. It took us a while to get to the point where we needed to give actual access to archive data. Back then, data was restricted for 30 years if it contained no personal information, and 80 years if it contained personal information. So it really was not until the zeros, I don't know, is that what you call the first decade? What?
The arties.
The arties. All right, thank you. That's when we realized that, hey, some of this information is actually going to be publicly available soon, so we need to find a way to make them accessible. And that's when we developed the access system called Sophia. And that's actually the system that we have used until now. And obviously, the world has not stood still since 2008, and certainly not in the digital world. And one of the things that has changed is that the amount of born digital records that we have in our collection has just grown enormously. We have now more than 1 petabyte of born digital data in our collection, and that's about 10,000 data sets. not necessarily unique databases. Many of them are snapshots, like we heard about a little while ago. So one IT system can produce several data sets, but still it's quite a lot. And certainly something that SOFIA was not designed to handle back in the noughties. The way we disseminate born digital data is, of course, in a lot of varieties, but there are two main components. One is that we make all metadata about the born digital records publicly available on a platform that we call Digidata, where you can also download information packages that are freely available. And then we have the SOFIA system, where we can convert the AIPs into a dissemination information package, so you can search through the data that has been archived. SOFIA has 3 different search templates, and the first one is very small on the screen, but I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a search template for records management system, and probably the one that we use the most. It's based on the fact that there are certain types of information that you will always find in a records management system, or at least a records management system in a Danish context, because it's required by us at the National Archives, things such as a subject according to a file plan, a case ID, a case title, a document date, etc. So the task for the person on my staff who does the pre-processing is to map these types of information with the actual data model. So it's a really great thing for our users, because to them, they don't need to know anything about the original system. They don't need to know anything about the data model, etc., etc. For them, an archived version of a records management system will always look the same, because our staff has done all the pre-processing for them. But of course, this is a very costly process. It's time consuming, so you will have to wait for a long time before you can access data. And it also introduces the risk of manual errors in the mapping process. And of course, it restricts the amount of data that you can search through. We also make custom-made search templates for other kinds of databases, and then here we have the pre-processing defined by the actual user needs, and then sometimes it can be reused for the next user. Sometimes we will have to make a new search template for a database. And then finally, for the really advanced user, they can create their own SQL queries. I don't think anybody ever does that, because it's just too complicated. So our users, they rely heavily on our pre-processing. So why did we need a new access system? Well, already a few years after we developed SOFIA, we changed the format for submission information packages so that it was based on the Danish variety of eArK, the eArK format that you heard about. And of course, this resulted in some changes to SOFIA, but there was never the thorough rewriting of code that you might have needed. So in a sense, you could say that SOFIA was just with duct tape made capable to read the new information packages, but it kind of tried to look at them like the old ones. And also, and this is a point that I will come back to in my conclusion later, it's really difficult to find enough IT developer resources for a system that's already in use. I mean, even if it's almost to the point of being a proof of concept, once it's there, once it's working, it's super difficult to find resources to do anything about it, even if it's an archival core system. Also, as you might imagine, after 15 or more than 15 years, the old SOFIA application had reached end of life. And also the IT developer that knew most about it spent a lot of his time trying to make it work with the increasing amounts of data that we had to work with, and also in a technical environment that's very different from 2008. And then, of course, as I mentioned, it's a serious bottleneck that all AIPs have to go through a manual pre-processing before a user can access data in SOFIA. And this has become increasingly painful because the request for information has really surged. I'm not going to explain the graph in detail, but the green line at the bottom shows that while the number of data sets only increases with a few percentage points per year, maybe 300 new data sets per year, the amount of data, as shown by the blue graph on top, just really explodes. And then the green line just below it shows how many information packages are accessed through SOFIA per year. So we could see that the amount of data that we had to handle, the amount of requests that we had to handle, just surged completely around 2020 and from there on. And that was driven by several factors. We got an amendment to the Archives Act stating that you can get access to, in principle, any information about yourself in the archives. Obviously, you can't just go and say, I want to know everything about myself. But if you can state, I went to this hospital, I went to this high school, then we have to find information there about you. And certainly, that has generated a lot of requests. And then we also had a new right to early pension for those, or early retirement for those who had been working for more than 42 years. And again, where do you find information about what you did in the 70s? Well, you come to the National Archives. And then a third driver is the increasing demand for documentation from the agencies that submitted digital data to us earlier. Now they don't have the information anymore, and they come to the National Archives to get this information. So it was obvious to us that SOFIA could not handle this, this demand any longer. The process of implementing a new access system proved to be quite lengthy, actually. We initiated the project in the spring of 2022, and we are now in the final stages of implementation, so over to the right in this timeline. First, we wanted to make sure that we had enough time to identify the needs of our users, given that we could see that all the use cases might not be the same now as they were in 2007 or 8 when we developed SOFIA. And this resulted in a generic requirement specification, and we had the assistance of a consultancy to see how we might achieve the requirements. It could be either through a development of a new system or through a product that we could buy off the shelf. We decided that the best option was to build on Database Preservation Toolkit because it's an open source system where we could adapt it to our needs. It did not meet all our requirements, so we had a pilot phase where we sort of tried it with some of our users so we could create an actual requirements specification, have the public tender, a tender that was won by Keep, and then we had a development process with Keep last year, and were ready to go around Christmas, but then we also needed to take into account that this was a really good time to rethink all the information security around access to born digital records, because the number of users was so much higher than before, the amount of data so much higher than before, and also a lot of things have happened with GDPR, et cetera, et cetera. So we started using the system in April, and we hope to be done by the end of June so we can close down SOFIA after many years of faithful service. In the discussion of the choice of system, we of course had to discuss, should we develop it ourselves or buy something off the shelf? And the option of developing ourselves was not really attractive because we knew how costly it would be, but there was no system on the market that could fulfill all our requirements. And some of them are listed there with faster load and better indexing of data, better search facilities, better support for large objects, et cetera, et cetera. So there were some things that we needed to have developed. But we could see that the Database Preservation Toolkit certainly had the potential to be the system for us. And the database preservation toolkit, as most of you know, is a tool that was built in the E-ARK project, where you can create eArch versions, and you have a eArch viewer built into the database preservation toolkit. We felt that it met about 80% of our requirements, but we needed, of course, support for our variety of eArch. We needed it to be better in user management. We needed an integrated document viewer. I'm sorry for, I know that a sound cannot be shown in a viewer, but something that can give you access to TIFF sound and video, maybe. Search across databases, so you can search in several databases at one time. And we also needed a translation to Danish. Well, I guess maybe we didn't need it, but the head of our department is an old geezer who thinks that we should keep the national languages in Europe, including Danish. So we now have a version of the toolkit that has what I would call a DNA look and feel. For our users, this just looks like any other web page of the Danish National Archives with the same colors, the same logo, the same font, etc., etc. So for our users, it's just something that feels totally familiar. It was a really long process, and you might ask why it was such a long process. But we felt that it was important after so many years of Sophia to make sure that all business needs were identified, also in a situation where all the use cases might have changed. We also, of course, needed to be absolutely sure that we did everything right with regards to the procurement regulations. We can't just go out and say, we'll buy this. We need to figure out what we need, how we could achieve it, and then we have also the process of procurement. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it might have made the process a little longer, but also, I think, more thorough. And then, as I said, there's just an increased focus on data protection, GDPR, etc. So this was a really good time to take enough time to discuss the new sort of information security measures in implementing a new access system. Some final thoughts about the process. Since it's so difficult to find enough external developer resources to maintain all our systems, it is important for us as archives to see if we can find somebody that can help us outside our own walls. And we feel that the European cooperation in the E-ARK project and the subsequent projects in eArchiving, they have paved the way for our ability to use external developers, even for archival core systems. And that's super important because we couldn't do that 10 or 15 years ago. Then we would have to use our own developers because nobody knew what we were talking about. And we feel that the use of standards such as OIIS and eArch has been really helpful in the communication with vendors, in this case, Keep. And we are really happy that the solution provided is open source because it reduces the risk of vendor login. I said to Janet last night that I wouldn't be all happy clappy, but in fact I am almost all happy clappy because it has been, I think, a really successful project based on many hours of hard work in the European project. So thank you to all of you who have been parts of that. That doesn't mean that you don't have to do a whole lot of work yourself. Of course you do, but where we are now is in a much better place as a community than we were 10 years ago.